I'm Evan McMorris Santoro in Southeast Kentucky, and this is CNN.
Breaking news we're following. We're expecting to hear directly from President Biden very soon about what the White House now says is a successful counterterrorism operation in Afghanistan. We have our White House correspondent, MJ Lee, standing by, as well as our Pentagon correspondent, Barbara Starr. So, MJ, what are you learning, first of all, right now?
Yeah, Wolf, there has been a sudden and significant addition to the White House schedule. We have just found out that the president will be speaking to the nation at 7:30 p.m. tonight. And according to a senior administration official, what we are told is that over the weekend, the United States conducted a counterterrorism operation against a significant al-Qaeda target in Afghanistan. This official said that the operation was successful and that there were no civilian casualties. So again, we expect to hear directly from the president about this operation at 7:30 this evening. Of course, the context that we have to keep in mind is that it was just about a year ago, in August of 2021, that the last U.S. military planes flew out of Afghanistan, officially marking an end to this long U.S. involvement in the war in Afghanistan. Of course, that withdrawal process ultimately ended up being incredibly chaotic, and it ended up being bloody. So again, this is just something to keep in mind as well as we wait to learn more details about this operation. We do expect that officials will brief reporters as well before the president speaks later tonight. So hopefully in the next hour or so, we will know a little bit more about what exactly this operation was. The other thing I will quickly note too, Wolf, of course, is that the president is currently isolating from a rebound case of COVID. He had gone back into isolation Saturday after having emerged from isolation earlier in the week last week. So this is why I think part of the reason, according to the White House's guidance, he is going to be speaking from the Blue Room balcony. So an effort clearly being made here for him to speak in an outdoor setting as opposed to indoors, Wolf. But again, presidential remarks expected at 7:30 tonight.
Yeah, this is significant. Barbara, you're at the Pentagon for us. So what are the military and national security implications here?
Well, look, Wolf, in the last year since the U.S. pulled out of Afghanistan and the Taliban took over, there has not been a lot of public attention to the security picture inside that country. But make no mistake, the U.S. intelligence community, the U.S. military, has been watching inside Afghanistan intently to the best that they can with no troops and no aircraft on the ground. What they have said for the last several months is they see evidence, intelligence indicators that both al-Qaeda and ISIS are regrouping inside Afghanistan and are on the rise again. So this is something that the intelligence community, especially when it comes to al-Qaeda, of course, has been watching very closely. How could this strike, if you will, this mission against a significant al-Qaeda target have taken place? Well, almost certainly, Wolf, it was done by an airstrike, and an airstrike not by the U.S. military. The other government agency that carries out airstrikes, it is public knowledge, we're revealing nothing here, is the Central Intelligence Agency. And why do we say drone strikes? Well, first of all, the U.S. will not put a manned aircraft, will not put a pilot over Afghanistan because they have no way to rescue a pilot if a pilot were to go down. So they don't conduct reconnaissance, those surveillance missions of targets and any strikes by manned aircraft. Drone strikes have been an extraordinarily difficult thing to even think about. We believe this may well be the first one. The U.S. has drones stationed at very far distances in nearby countries. It's a long distance for those drones, unmanned air vehicles, to fly, drop their weapons, and go back. So this is something that it would have been a target. They might have been watching very carefully from other drones and then picked their time to move in on it. Wolf?
Of course, we're standing by right now for the president's address to the nation on this. We'll have live coverage here on CNN. Of course, our Barbara Starr, MJ Lee, guys, thank you very, very much.
Invested.
All right, Maggie, hold on for a moment. We got some breaking news coming out of Barbara Starr at the Pentagon. She's learning important new information. Barbara, what are you learning?
Wolf, several of my colleagues here at CNN are now able to confirm to everyone that Ayman al-Zawahiri, Osama bin Laden's longtime number 2, is the al-Qaeda operative that was killed in a strike in Afghanistan that was conducted by all accounts by the Central Intelligence Agency using a drone. This is the man who was at bin Laden's side. This is the man who has has almost entirely remained out of sight since the 9/11 attacks. There have been videos that he's made. He has made statements. He had attempted to remain relevant. If he was actually killed in Afghanistan, that will prove to be quite interesting, because the U.S. had long assumed for many years he too, like bin Laden, was hiding out in the rural areas of Pakistan along the Afghan border. Ayman al-Zawahiri it was long wanted by the United States. There was a $25 million reward on his head. He had been seen as, after bin Laden's death especially, if you will, if not the spiritual head of al-Qaeda, at least the best known name of the al-Qaeda organization, even as al-Qaeda regrouped around the world, as it began to regroup in Africa, in the Middle East, as it became the post-9/11 al-Qaeda. Zawahiri was the name and the face that was so recognized in extremist circles around the world. So if he was in fact, as we can now say, killed by this CIA drone, that will prove to be very interesting. It would mean that the U.S. had some very specific intelligence inside Afghanistan, where there are no U.S. military or intelligence personnel, there are no aircraft, there are no troops, but the U.S. must have had the intelligence to understand where he was hiding, where he would be, and to be able, think about this, Wolf, to be able to send that drone at some lengthy distance over Afghanistan, know where to send the drone, and know where he would be at a point in time when that drone arrived. And if you'll indulge me, let me make one more point. As someone who was inside the Pentagon on the morning of September 11th, I think for so many Americans, September 11th still really strikes to the very heart of American democracy and who Americans are at their core. There are people who out there who, of course, will say all kinds of things about 9/11 and that, you know, nobody ever got to the bottom of it. But for those who were at any of the sites or had relatives, friends, colleagues, this really strikes home. Another name and face of the al-Qaeda organization brought to justice.
Yeah, this is a huge, huge moment for the U.S. As someone who's reported on this for many, many years, going back to 9/11, he was always seen as bin Laden's number two. Ayman al-Zawahiri, killed in this U.S. strike in Afghanistan. We're learning new information right now. I want to go to MJ Lee, our White House correspondent. MJ, the President of the United States, I understand, fairly soon is going to address the nation on this, right?
That's right, Wolf, and you get a sense of obviously what a significant mission this was, given the fact that we've just learned that the president is going to be delivering remarks to the nation in just about 2.5 hours, an hour and a half actually, around 7:30 in the evening. This had not been on the White House schedule. We only just learned about this, and we should be getting some more details as officials prepare to talk to reporters and brief them on some of the details behind this operation that we really didn't know about until just moments ago. There are, of course, questions that will be raised to senior U.S. officials about how this operation was conducted, how they were able to secure the location of the target. And when the senior administration official said in a statement earlier that the operation was successful and that there were no civilian casualties, there are sure to be questions about how the administration was certain that there were no civilian casualties. So again, we should be hearing directly from the president in just about an hour and a half. We should note, of course, again, that this is happening in the context of the president still isolating from a rebound case of COVID. This is why we are going to be hearing his remarks given from the Blue Room balcony. This is, of course, unusual. Obviously, some precautions being taken so that he can deliver these remarks outdoors instead of indoors, Wolf.
And there's no doubt, and I know this from my reporting over the years, for years the U.S. intelligence community, the U.S. military, the national security apparatus has been searching for Ayman al-Zawahiri. They've desperately sought to either arrest him, charge him, or kill him. And now it looks like they have actually succeeded in killing bin Laden's number two, Ayman al-Zawahiri. This is a huge, huge deal, MJ, and the president will be explaining what happened. That's coming up fairly soon.
Yeah, this is a huge deal. And again, it is why we are going to be hearing directly from the president when you have an operation like this that, again, as far as we know, obviously officials are telling us now that this was a successful operation. This is a moment that the president is obviously going to seize and to put context around this for the American people, for him to speak directly to the American people about the significance of this. And we'll see what exactly the tone is that comes from the president. As we were talking about before, one important context here, of course, is just the timeline in terms of the U.S.'s exit from Afghanistan. This was just about a year ago that the last planes flew out of Afghanistan in August of 2021. So it hasn't been very long. I think that context is going to be something that we want to hear more about, just in terms of operationally how the U.S. was able to conduct this kind of strike in Afghanistan when obviously there's been no U.S. military presence there for a number of months.
MJ, stand by. Barbara Starr, you're over at the Pentagon. To underscore how important this is, let's remember the State Department had offered, $25 million reward money for anyone coming up with information leading to the capture or the killing of Ayman al-Zawahiri.
Well, that's right, Wolf. And that raises the question that MJ is talking about. How would they know? How would they know where he was? Did they have a snitch on the ground? And could they trust that snitch, if you will? Did they have satellites overhead watching where that snitch may have told them Zawahiri was? Or did they have communications intercepts? Were they able to intercept cell phone calls, electronic transmissions, computer exchanges of any sort, any kind of electronic communications between al-Qaeda operatives that might have talked even months ago about where Ayman al-Zawahiri was? One of the reasons we're talking about this in terms of being a drone strike, even before we hear from the administration, is in fact it would be almost impossible, frankly, for the U.S. to put any kind of special operations team on the ground, because the U.S. will not fly manned aircraft, we are told, into Afghanistan because it has no ability to rescue any downed crew, downed pilots, downed personnel. So this is why it has been our understanding for many months that any missions in Afghanistan would have to rely on unmanned drones. Why the Pentagon, the CIA, has been talking to neighboring countries for months about trying to base drones out of those countries. This is their only way that we know of, at least reasonably, to get in and out of Afghanistan. So this would have been unmanned, we believe, at this point, and it would have been very complex because either they got a last-minute tip that was solid and they went for it, or they had been watching for some time where they thought Ayman al-Zawahiri might be. It's going to be fascinating what they tell us, what they don't tell us, and what we might be able to discern from all of that, Wolf.
And Barbara, you and I covered all of this over these many, many years, watching ever since the U.S. killed bin Laden. Ayman al-Zawahiri was also seen as the successor to bin Laden. He was the number two. They've been trying to find this guy, capture or kill him for so many years. This is a huge, huge moment for the U.S.
It really is. He is the face and figure of al-Qaeda around the world, even as al-Qaeda over the years since 9/11 has morphed into a very different organization. Number one, there has been very recent concern about al-Qaeda operatives regrouping in Afghanistan. There has been concern about al-Qaeda affiliates and offshoot organizations operating across Africa, really causing mayhem for some of the most vulnerable populations in that part of the world. Concern about al-Qaeda remains very strong around the world, but without bin Laden over the last many years, it had not been quite the same organization, if you will, with that singular pledge of allegiance to Osama bin Laden. Zawahiri at various points had sort of been seen as the elderly caretaker. Over the years, we saw videos of him emerge, and U.S. officials would tell us, oh, don't worry about it too much. He's just trying to remain relevant. At various points, they did not believe that he was the strongest leader of al-Qaeda, but he never went away. And with al-Qaeda back on the rise in Afghanistan, with concern about al-Qaeda possibly operating on the border with Pakistan, there is significant concern that al-Qaeda is regrouping. And that might have opened the door to some of the intelligence that they were able to develop to conduct this strike. That's what we want to learn. What is it that led the United States to know where Ayman al-Zawahiri was and how certain they were he was there enough to be able to go after him?
And I assume that the President of the United States, President Biden, had to personally approve the killing of Ayman al-Zawahiri. This is a huge, huge moment for the U.S. right now. We're standing by to hear directly from the President of the United States. He's going to be addressing the nation on this. Much more of our special coverage coming up right here in the Situation Room. We're getting more information right now. We'll be right back. Happening now, breaking news. CNN has learned the United States has successfully targeted and killed the al-Qaeda leader, Ayman al-Zawahiri. Stand by for details on the drone strike in Afghanistan as President Biden is preparing right now to address the nation on this strike. Also tonight, increasing death and destruction from extreme weather here in the United States. CNN is on the scene of historic flooding in eastern Kentucky and an exploding wildfire in Northern California. Welcome to our viewers here in the United States and around the world. I'm Wolf Blitzer. You're in the Situation Room. Let's get right to the breaking news. The United States killing the leader of al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri, more than a decade after the raid that took out Osama bin Laden. Let's go to our White House correspondent, MJ Lee. She's working the story for us. MJ, this is really significant and an important moment for the U.S. right now. Tell our viewers what you're learning.
That's right, Wolf. This is about to be a major announcement that we hear directly from President Biden. We expect that President Biden will be addressing the nation at around 7:30 tonight. And a senior administration official had told us that this was a counterterrorism operation of a significant al-Qaeda target. And now we are learning from sources that this target was, in fact, al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri. Now, the senior administration official had importantly also noted that the successful operation did not result in any civilian casualties. Now, of course, keep in mind that this comes about a year after the U.S.'s full withdrawal from Afghanistan, the last military planes leaving Afghanistan in August of last year. So this is going to raise a lot of questions that perhaps the president himself will address about how exactly this operation was conducted, given that there are no U.S. American military presence currently in Afghanistan, and also what the assurances are that we hear potentially from the president himself on this note that there were no civilian casualties. Now, as you know, the president has been isolating because of a rebound case of COVID, and this is a part of the reason why we are going to hear the president deliver his remarks from the Blue Room balcony instead of an indoor setting. There's no question, Wolf, that when we hear the president speak later tonight, he is going to be speaking as the nation's commander-in-chief, a significant operation and a significant announcement coming directly from the president in just a little bit, Wolf.
And I can only assume that the president personally had to sign off on this decision to target and kill Ayman al-Zawahiri, the leader of al-Qaeda. Stand by, MJ. I want to get some more from our Pentagon correspondent, Barbara Starr, right now. You're over there with the U.S. military. Barbara, what are you picking up?
Well, Wolf, we have every reason at the moment to believe this was a drone strike, most likely carried out by the CIA, not by the U.S. military. But that being said, why do we believe that is the most likely scenario? Is because the U.S. does not send manned aircraft over Afghanistan because it has no ability to recover pilots or crews if they go down. So this would not have been like the bin Laden operation, most likely. This would not have been special operations forces on the ground. We don't believe that that's what, right now, that is what happened. This operation, most likely drones that had been watching overhead. But it raises a very interesting question. In the bin Laden operation, of course, Navy SEALs went into that compound, killed bin Laden, took photographs. There was proof of death. And so we will have to see if the administration is able to offer the world similar specific proof, if there was anybody on the ground, that Zawahiri is dead. We just simply don't know the answer at this time. $25 million reward on his head. He was, by all accounts, the leader of the al-Qaeda movement after bin Laden was killed. Now, whether he directed specific operations, the U.S. remained plenty worried about him and worried about the resurgence of al-Qaeda, especially in Afghanistan, and very worried that there would be enough resurgence of al-Qaeda, and they still worry in the coming years that al-Qaeda could again regroup, organize itself to be able to carry out some kind of strikes against U.S. interests or even the U.S. homeland. That continues to be the reason al-Qaeda is a core concern of the U.S. intelligence community, the military, and the entire U.S. government. Any al-Qaeda ability after all these years to strike out again is something they want to make sure they deal with before it would even remotely happen. So now Zawahiri dead, we need to learn how exactly it happened and where that leaves al-Qaeda now. What is the U.S. intelligence assessment with Zawahiri gone, bin Laden long gone, of the capability of the al-Qaeda organization, how it may be able to regroup leadership now, raise funds, organize, train, equip, and where al-Qaeda may be planning to strike in the future.
Yeah, huge, huge win for the U.S. right now. Ayman al-Zawahiri killed by the United States. Barbara, stay with us. I also want to bring in CNN national security analyst Peter Bergen. He's the author of The Rise and Fall of Osama bin Laden. He knows this subject really, really well. Also joining us, CNN military analyst, retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, and CNN national security correspondent Kylie Atwood is with us as well. General Hertling, how significant is this strike killing the al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri?
This is a target that the U.S. has been going after for over almost 3 decades, Wolf. This even goes before the 9/11 strikes. Zawahiri leads an al-Qaeda that has various networks around the globe with an uneven centralized control. Affiliates like Hurus ad-Din in Syria, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and Yemen, Ansar al-Islam in the African Sahel, al-Shabaab in Somalia. So you're talking about an individual who is the CEO of this organization. You can debate how powerful he is compared to bin Laden, but it's a big deal. The other thing I'd bring up too is, Barbara mentioned that this was more than likely a drone strike. That I would give that probably a 70% possibility, but I wouldn't rule out a man strike against this individual either. What you're talking about is the kinds of things we talked about when we withdrew from Afghanistan. This would be an over-the-horizon strike with very little capability for collecting intelligence within Afghanistan. This was a significant hit by both the intelligence community and anyone who pulled off this operation.
Yeah, the U.S. has been trying to find this guy, capture him or kill him for so many years. Peter Bergen, Ayman al-Zawahiri took over as the leader of al-Qaeda after the killing of bin Laden. As someone who's covered al-Qaeda extensively, and you have, what can you tell us about Ayman al-Zawahiri and how big a loss this is for the terror group?
Well, I would say Ayman al-Zawahiri, he was in his early 70s when he was killed. He comes from an upper middle class Egyptian family. He's a surgeon, he's a physician, he's a smart guy. He was not, however, a charismatic leader in the mold of bin Laden. And I don't think he ever really resuscitated al-Qaeda when he took it over back when bin Laden was killed on May 1st, 2011. He didn't prove to be a very competent leader of al-Qaeda. But the reason I think that he was killed in Afghanistan over the weekend was he was beginning to take a lot more risks. According to the United Nations, he'd released kind of an unprecedented number of videos. Every time you record a video, there's the chain of custody of that video, getting it out there, somebody maybe taking the video. So he was becoming more prominent. And I think it seems to me that may well have been the reason that he was detected.
You know, General Hertling, a Taliban spokesperson, has just tweeted, and I'm quoting now, that an airstrike was carried out on a residential house in Kabul city on July 31st. And once again, I'm quoting, initial findings determined that the strike was carried out by an American drone. That's the tweet. What do you make of those details?
Well, I don't think we should be taking any intelligence from anybody within the Taliban right now, Wolf. That's certainly something that they're going to talk about, the potential for civilian casualties, for damage to a neighborhood. So, you know, again, I think we really need to listen to what the president says today and the kind of intelligence we have and how confident the U.S. is on the success of this strike. I think we're going to get a lot tonight at 7:30 from President Biden.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we're going to get a lot of details on how this was all carried out. The U.S. has been trying to do this for so many years. Kylie, this comes after the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, nearly a year or so ago, changing the counterterrorism landscape. That presents new challenges for the U.S. right now, doesn't it?
Incredibly new challenges, Wolf. And I think those at the State Department, those within the Biden administration who said after that withdrawal that the Biden administration would still work on counterterrorism operations in Afghanistan are probably feeling pretty good right now. Because, as you said, according to that Taliban spokesperson, this was a drone strike that was carried out yesterday in Kabul, which is hugely significant. Of course, we need to wait to hear the details about how this was carried out from the president tonight. But if the United States was able to work with the Taliban on this, yet to be seen if that was actually the case, then that would be significant. And there have been concerns about how the Biden administration, how the U.S. could continue any sort of legitimate counterterrorism operations in the country without having a U.S. military footprint on the ground there.
And once again, we're standing by to hear directly from the President of the United States. He's getting ready to address the nation, indeed the world, on this major development for the U.S. Everyone stand by. We're continuing to follow this huge breaking news. We'll have much more on the U.S. killing of the al-Qaeda leader, Ayman al-Zawahiri, in Afghanistan. Much more of our special coverage right here in the Situation Room right after this. We're back with major breaking news right now. Sources telling CNN the United States has killed al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri in Afghanistan in a successful drone strike against Osama bin Laden's successor. President Biden is preparing to address the nation and indeed the world very shortly about this operation. Jim Sciutto, you and I have covered this story for a long time. This is a huge deal.
No question. I mean, first on Zawahiri, he was literally bin Laden's right-hand man. When he merged Egyptian Islamic Jihad, that was Zawahiri's initial organization, with al-Qaeda, it became a bigger, more capable organization. This goes back to the 1998 embassy bombings, even prior to 9/11, that he was operationally involved with. But
the U.S. embassy bombings.
The U.S. embassy bombings in Tanzania and Kenya. And also, in terms of personal relationships with bin Laden, he was his physician, as well as his second in command of the organization. So ties to the man who led al-Qaeda for many years. And since then, for more than a decade, after bin Laden's killing, Zawahiri has been the #1 man in this organization. So in that sense, he is significant in his own right, and second only really to Osama bin Laden in terms of stature inside that organization. The other point I would make is this, is that the U.S. ability to carry out operations from outside Afghanistan post its withdrawal last August has very much been in question. Bill Burns, the director of the CIA, has acknowledged publicly they can't do it as well, right? They don't have the same resources. They don't have the same vision and surveillance without people on the ground. I spoke to the head of MI6, Britain's Foreign Intelligence Service, last week. He acknowledged to me in public it is more difficult from outside in, as the British call it. The Americans call it over the horizon. For the U.S. to have carried this out from over the horizon. A successful attack like this via drones, outside surveillance, whatever help they had on the ground in terms of intelligence, if a bounty played a role, still shows remarkable capability a year after the U.S. took its footprint off the ground. Remember, that footprint was, yes, uniformed U.S. soldiers, but it was also heavily CIA operatives that were carrying out the bulk, really, of U.S. counterterror activity before the withdrawal.
You know, it's interesting, General Hertling, the assumption, correct me if I'm wrong, was that Ayman al-Zawahiri was hiding out somewhere in Pakistan, where bin Laden had been hiding out as well. If he went from Pakistan into Afghanistan, assuming that might be safer for him following the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, that would be significant.
Well, back in the day when we were discussing Afghanistan a whole lot more than Ukraine, Wolf, we know that Fatah, the area that people move back and forth between Afghanistan and Pakistan, is basically a free zone. It's not difficult to cross over from one to the other. But to really hone in on Jim's point a minute ago in terms of that over-the-horizon capability, back when we withdrew from Afghanistan, there was a lot of discussion about the impossibility of doing over-the-horizon strikes. And the Central Command commander at the time also said, yes, it will be much more difficult. But when you're talking about gathering intelligence on key targets in order to conduct targeting data, there are all kinds of different targeting capabilities. If you take away one of those, like the human targeting capability, where you have someone on the ground knowing where the person is and can confirm or deny their location, that's significant. But you still have intelligence, signals, overhead imagery, spies within the Taliban government, potentially even, that would rat out this guy, because the complexities of the relationship, as Peter Bergen will tell you, are extreme in this case. The dynamics between the Taliban, al-Qaeda, and even the personality of Zawahiri. So all of those are factors in terms of how do you get the intelligence to conduct a strike from a long distance when you don't have people inside of a country.
Well, you make a really important point. I want to bring in Peter Bergen right now. He's a real expert on al-Qaeda. Peter, what is, as far as we know, the al-Qaeda relationship right now with the Taliban in Afghanistan?
Very close. I mean, and don't take my word for it. The UN issued a very detailed report just last month. They issue these reports fairly regularly. This one was focused on ISIS and al-Qaeda. The UN has characterized the acting Minister of the Interior, Siraj Haqqani, as a member of the Leadership Council of al-Qaeda. So here you have this unusual example of al-Qaeda actually being a cabinet member of the Taliban, a member of al-Qaeda being a Taliban cabinet member. So those relations are very close. And I think this gets to why perhaps Zawahiri was found. He was feeling very comfortable. The UN in the same report said that he released an sort of unprecedented number of videotapes kind of testifying, A, to a current proof of life, and B, to kind of the comfort level that he had with the Taliban. So I think that will be part of the story that we'll see as we get to know more about how this went down.
And we're about to learn a whole lot more about how this went down. Barbara Starr, you're at the Pentagon for us. It may have been a CIA drone operation, but there's no doubt the U.S. military was deeply involved in preparing for it, the intelligence that was necessary, among other things. Tell us what you're learning.
Well, Wolf, the U.S. military, the intelligence community, they share the most exquisitely classified information on al-Qaeda literally every day. They all have the same information. They know what is happening, and they understand what al-Qaeda may be up to. We don't know yet what the key piece of intelligence was that led them to understand, or when it happened, led them to understand where Ayman al-Zawahiri was. They may have been tracking him for some time. And as you said a short time ago, Wolf, they must have, it would make perfect common sense that they would have presented options to President Biden about how to best go after Zawahiri. This is something that very typically happens when the CIA or the Pentagon has a target. You take an important target, you take it to the President of the United States, and you say, here's some options, how we can get after this target, how we can capture or kill this person. And you most importantly tell the President what are the risks. And that's the key thing, I think, at this hour that we do not know that may prove most interesting. What are the risks that were presented to Joe Biden? How did he evaluate them? And how, with his advisors, did he come to a decision? Certainly a drone, an unmanned weapon system flying hours into Afghanistan would have been the least risky. No human life at risk in the air from a pilot or a crew. But you might not have the proof that Zawahiri was killed. You would need someone on the ground to take a photo to prove to the world that it was him. Was that a Taliban operative in cooperation with the U.S.? Were there some kind of intelligence operatives that went in on the ground, as risky as that would have been? So that's going to be one of the key questions. What were the risks? How did the president evaluate them? How did he come to the decision he made? And we may or may not, I want to raise this with everyone, we may or may not learn details. If this was something so difficult, and as I say, based on such exquisite intelligence, they may tell the America and the world some details, but they may decide to keep some things very close hold in case this was the type of operation that they may want to conduct again in the future, Wolf.
You know, MJ, you're our White House correspondent, and I remember the night that the world learned that the U.S. had killed bin Laden. There's the former President Obama with his top national security advisors. You see the then Vice President Joe Biden sitting there as well. They were in the White House Situation Room watching all of that unfold. I can only assume, MJ, that this operation, the President Biden and his top national security advisors returned to the White House Situation Room to monitor that. The only complication being the President of the United States over the weekend once again tested positive for COVID, so maybe he decided to stay out of the Situation Room. But what are you learning? I assume we're going to get a lot more details on this from the President when he addresses the nation and the world very soon.
That's right, Wolf. And as we wait for the president to deliver these remarks, it is worth just spending a beat thinking back on this raid to kill Osama bin Laden under President Obama. That iconic photo that you just put up on the screen, President Biden, who was vice president at the time, of course, was literally the person sitting in front of President Obama at the time as this raid was going on. He had literally a front row seat to one of the most consequential moments of former President Obama's presidency. And he also, of course, saw firsthand just how consequential this was for President Obama politically. I think it is way, way too soon to start talking about the political ramifications of this strike. We haven't even heard directly from the president, but I will tell you, when we get to the point of being able to talk about the political ramifications, I mean, there's no question that the president is going to be thinking about what a huge sort of victory this is going to be as he talks to the nation as the nation's commander-in-chief. The raid that killed Osama bin Laden literally, remember, got turned into bumper stickers. It was a message that the White House very much touted at the time. It was something that they obviously celebrated and talked a lot about, and we could see something similar coming from this White House and this president. But again, I just want to emphasize, too soon to talk about politics as we wait for the president to deliver these remarks. If I could just say one more thing that we have been discussing, just about how such a strike might have been possible, how the U.S. Would have been able to conduct such an operation. We can actually look back directly on some of the things that the president himself has said. Going back to last summer around the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, he made pretty clear in his remarks that the U.S. is going to continue fighting terrorism in Afghanistan, but he said we just don't need to fight a ground war to do it. We can do it with over-the-horizon capabilities. So if this ends up being what actually happened with this strike, we shouldn't be all too surprised. He has telecast this before.
Yeah, we're standing by to get a whole lot more details on this historic moment that we're watching unfold right now. Everybody stand by. Just ahead, we're going to discuss the killing of Ayman al-Zawahiri, the al-Qaeda leader, with a key member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and a veteran of the war in Afghanistan. Congressman Adam Kinzinger is standing by live. We'll be right back. We're following major breaking news right now. CNN confirming that the United States has targeted and killed the al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri in a drone strike in Afghanistan. President Biden is getting ready to address the nation and indeed the world very soon from the White House. Right now, we're joined by Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger of Illinois. He's a key member of the Foreign Affairs Committee. He's a U.S. Air Force veteran who served in both Afghanistan and Iraq. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us. Let me get your reaction first to the news that the U.S. successfully targeted and killed bin Laden's successor, Ayman al-Zawahiri.
Well, this is huge. It's a moral victory, of course. Zawahiri has been a target of the United States for decades. It is an actual victory in terms of making America safer. He was the leader of al-Qaeda, as we know, since Osama bin Laden. And while al-Qaeda's been a little quieter lately, they certainly have not given up on their goals of attacking us. This is a big win. I congratulate the president for making the call and for the intel and military communities for executing this. I know some of the details I can't say, and it was seemingly fairly complicated, but yeah, good work to everybody.
You had heard about this over the weekend, is that right?
I had a source that informed me of this a number of hours ago, and I was impressed it stayed quiet.
Yeah, it's amazing how a major development like that does remain quiet. As I pointed out, Congressman, you served in Afghanistan. What are the challenges of conducting a strike like this? And we're told it was a drone strike after the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan nearly a year or so ago.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge is massive. So first off, I think there's a lot of questions. Maybe the military knows more about this, but did the Taliban know that he was there? That could lend, further credence to Taliban and al-Qaeda cooperation. But it's very difficult. When you have troops and intel assets in place, obviously they have their sources. You can get very real-time information. When you don't have that, and we've certainly been hamstrung in our ability to be able to target these kinds of targets, then it makes it a lot more difficult. You don't get as much real-time information. How do you confirm something? If somebody tells you this person's here, how do you confirm that's them? Obviously, we can still do that in some cases, and today is a great day to celebrate that. But I also think it's a moment to really keep in mind somebody will replace al-Zawahiri, and how are we going to take them out eventually as well?
Well, how does the U.S. go about collecting intelligence on an al-Qaeda leader like Ayman al-Zawahiri without boots on the ground, whether in Afghanistan or Pakistan for that matter? How do you think the U.S. was able to carry out this mission?
Well, I mean, it could be any number of things, and I don't know the answer to what happened here, but what we do know, we have the ability to do. Obviously, there's sources that can give us information. There's electronic means. I would tend to think that he was fairly safe on the electronic side, as Osama bin Laden was, but he also may have been feeling a little arrogant because we were out of Afghanistan, and particularly if the Taliban gave him safe harbor, he probably had no reason to suspect he was a target. And even if they didn't, he probably still felt a little safer. So there's any number of things the intel community can do to find something out. And then obviously, when you don't have people on the ground, the difficulty is we may have some pretty good cameras and stuff, but you can't necessarily tell who somebody is from the sky. And so you have to have other ways to confirm that.
How much do you believe this strike actually degrades al-Qaeda right now, Congressman? Because the big question is what sort of threat they pose right now beyond the borders of their safe haven, let's say in Afghanistan.
Well, I think it certainly is degrading in the short term. So if you imagine kind of a fighter on the ropes, this was a massive blow and knocked that fighter down. That's what happens when you lose your spiritual leader. We know that's what happened when Osama bin Laden died. We got a lot of intel from that, but it also was a gut punch to al-Qaeda. But that doesn't mean they're done. There will be somebody to come and replace him. He may have already had a successor he was grooming, and their desire to kill us simply because of who we are has not changed. And look, let's just be honest, when we left Afghanistan, that did embolden them to believe that the United States could be beaten. We can't be beaten on the battlefield. Our will can be beaten. It was beaten in Afghanistan. But that said, today's a day to celebrate this moral and actual physical victory against al-Qaeda.
Does this strike, Congressman, show that the United States isn't taking its eyes off the threat from al-Qaeda, ISIS, and other terror groups in the region?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, even though our capacity is significantly degraded with whatever we have the ability to do, and I don't know all those details, I think they're still an enemy of the United States. We'll still go after them. again, we're not going to be able to do these operations as intensely as we were. And we need to keep that in mind when we talk about the U.S. future and partnerships with Iraq, for instance, when we talk about what Iran is doing and we talk about al-Qaeda or ISIS in Iraq, which still exists. We can keep these actions up here, there, around the world, but it is important to recognize that as great as technology is, technology cannot replace people on the ground that know things, that tell us things. And that's why it's important to both have those assets on the ground, but also to be able to follow through on our word. So when people tell us stuff, they know that we're not going to abandon them.
I assume, Congressman, the U.S. should be bracing now potentially for some sort of retaliation or revenge from al-Qaeda.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, al-Qaeda does not have the reach at the moment that they had, of course, on 9/11. This is why us staying on the offense against al-Qaeda. And so when you hear, some of these senators that say, bring all the boys home, people like Rand Paul or Josh Hawley that just wants to basically give up on the entire world, the reason that we've been safe is not because al-Qaeda's changed their mind. It's because we fought them where they exist. And so if they have the capacity to strike back, they would. Certainly in the United States if they could, but they probably have more capability to strike back on our forces or our allied forces in those regions. This is why it is important, as much as we may get tired of talking about the war, or we may come up with tripe words like endless wars, it's important for us to stay on offense, because we're going to find a day where if we let our guard down, they will be back here in the United States. Their will and their desire and their beliefs have not changed.
Good point. Congressman Adam Kinzinger, thanks so much for joining us, and thanks once again for your service to our country. We're going to have much more coming up on the breaking news we're following as we await remarks from the President of the United States. Stand by. We'll be right back.
I'm Ni'ma al-Bagher in Khartoum, Sudan, and this is CNN.
President Biden is getting ready to speak to the nation, indeed address the world less than an hour or so from now about a huge new development in the war against terror. Sources tell CNN the United States has killed the al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri in a drone strike in Afghanistan. Let's assess what's going on. Jim Sciutto, you're here with me in our Situation Room. I assume there are White House officials, national security officials in that other Situation Room down at the White House. They're watching all of this unfold very closely as well.
No question. This would show an enormous counterterror ability from outside in, from over the horizon inside Afghanistan, that frankly it was not clear the U.S. maintained following its withdrawal a year ago. In fact, senior U.S. officials, right up to the CIA director, acknowledged that we can't do this as well from outside the country without boots on the ground, both uniformed military, but also CIA operatives. So this is remarkable. It shows a remarkable ability to do that from afar. Now, we should inject a note of caution here. The statement is saying there were no civilian casualties. We should remember that a year ago, there was a strike, a counter-terrorist strike that turned out to have hit the wrong target. You'll remember this.
In Afghanistan.
In Afghanistan, they said it was an ISIS target, ended up killing 10 civilians. So we have to see, as this plays out, were there other casualties? Is there more? We don't know about this strike yet, and that's why we're going to be listening to the president in about an hour's time. The other piece I would say, and Barbara referenced this a bit, is what led to this intelligence. You can have surveillance from satellites, you can have it from drones, you can have tips on the ground. There was a $25 million bounty on Zawahiri's head. I remember going back to when the U.S. killed Uday and Qusay Hussein in Iraq. I was there. There was a $15 million bounty on their heads, and that's what led to the intel that led to them being killed by U.S. forces on the ground there. Was there a cooperator on the ground? Was that bounty involved? That's another question that we'll need to have answered.
Let me get General Hertling involved in this. General, they're going to have to prove that this was, in fact, Ayman al-Zawahiri who was targeted and killed. How do they do that?
Well, what Jim just said is fascinating, because the strike doesn't end with the strike. Yeah. And what I mean by that is, once the strike occurs, the intelligence community is looking to pick up what's called reflections. What kind of signals are going out? Is anyone talking? Are there movements of some of the other main leaders in Afghanistan, or movement within the Taliban government that might indicate what's happening and who has been killed? The very fact, as you said earlier, that the Taliban has issued a tweet saying a drone strike hit, or an aircraft strike, as they said, hit this community, doesn't tell you much, but it does tell you they're reporting something. Now, they may follow up with all kinds of manipulation of the intelligence, but I would suspect, having seen these kind of strikes before, and in fact conducted these kind of strikes before, that immediately upon executing the strike, you're listening for more intelligence, whether it be overhead platforms that are giving you indicator of what's occurring on the ground, or signals intelligence that are, hopefully picking up remarks of others within either the government or the al-Qaeda community.
Kylie, you do a lot of reporting on all of the national security related issues. How high of a target was Ayman al-Zawahiri for the U.S. at this point?
Well, listen, he was an incredibly high target, but not only a high target, but a long-standing target of the U.S. government, Wolf. When you guys were talking earlier, he is someone who was integrally involved in the planning of the twin embassy bombings that took place in 1998 against the U.S. embassies in Tanzania and Kenya. That was over 20 years ago. And at that time, of course, he was on the radar of the U.S. government. And thereafter, he actually escaped a U.S. missile strike that the United States tried to take him and Osama bin Laden out in Afghanistan. And since then, he has just risen in terms of how important he is to the U.S. government.
All right, everybody stand by. We're getting more information, more details on the breaking news. We're also awaiting remarks from the President of the United States, President Biden, getting ready to address the nation and indeed the world very, very soon. Stay with us. Much more of our special coverage coming up right here in the Situation Room. We're following major breaking news right now. A U.S. drone strike in Afghanistan targeting and killing the leader of al-Qaeda, Ayman al-Zawahiri. CNN's Michael Holmes looks at al-Zawahiri's life and legacy of terror.
We want to speak to the whole world. Who are we? Who are we?
By the time Ayman al-Zawahiri burst onto the world scene after the assassination of Egyptian President Anwar Sadat, he was already a terrorist, committed to turning Egypt into a fundamentalist Islamic state. The young doctor came from one of Egypt's leading families. There is even an al-Zawahiri street in Cairo named after his grandfather. His uncle described him as pious.
He was known that he is a good Muslim who is keen to pray at time in the mosque and to read and to think and to have his own decisions.
Al-Zawahiri spent 3 years in prison after Sadat's assassination. After he got out, he made his way to Pakistan, where he used his medical skills to treat those fighting the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. That's where he met Osama bin Laden, and they found a common cause. He talked about it a decade later.
We are working with Brother bin Laden. We know him since more than 10 years. We have fought with him here in Afghanistan, and we are working with him in Sudan and in many other places.
Al-Zawahiri was many places in the early 1990s, even, it's believed, visiting California on a false passport. His group attacked Egyptian embassies and tried to kill Egyptian politicians. Eventually, Al-Zawahiri folded his group into al-Qaeda.
Zawahiri pretty much led the group. He did the strategic policy of what al-Qaeda's agenda was. Certainly bin Laden gave his authority and blessings to it, but al-Zawahiri called the shots.
Al-Zawahiri was at bin Laden's side when he declared war on America in May 1998. Weeks later, they launched an attack on U.S. embassies in Africa and then gloated after they escaped a U.S. cruise missile attack launched in retaliation. After the 9/11 attacks, al-Zawahiri began to become the voice of al-Qaeda, taunting the U.S.
American people, you must ask yourselves, why all this hate against America?
After the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan, bin Laden and al-Zawahiri were on the run, sometimes together, more often apart. His wife and daughters were killed in a U.S. airstrike aimed at him. But he continued to issue messages on subjects ranging from the war in Iraq to the London subway attacks in 2005. And while he was always the likely choice to succeed Osama bin Laden, it took the organization several weeks to announce his promotion.
Zawahiri is not charismatic. He was not involved in the fight earlier on in Afghanistan. And I think he has a lot of detractors within the organization. And I think you're going to see them start eating themselves from within more and more.
Without bin Laden, al-Qaeda can never be the same.
An idea personified by Osama bin Laden. He was this charismatic figure. To join al-Qaeda, you pledged a personal oath to him. People went and died, not for Ayman Zawahiri or Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, but for Osama bin Laden.
Terror experts say that to jihadists worldwide, al-Qaeda still has great appeal as an inspiration. And while al-Zawahiri was an obvious successor to bin Laden, it's not at all clear who would succeed al-Zawahiri.
That was CNN's Michael Holmes reporting. Stay right here. We're going to have much more on all the breaking news right after this. President Biden is getting ready to address the nation and indeed the world a little over half an hour or so from now about the major breaking news, the killing of the al-Qaeda leader Ayman al-Zawahiri in a U.S. drone strike. Jim Sciutto, you and I were both covering that night when then President Obama announced the killing of bin Laden. And there's some similarities going on, at least in my mind, right now. No
question. Zawahiri was a leader and a joint founder, really, of the greatest terror threat that the U.S. has ever faced in al-Qaeda. And a decade later, after getting bin Laden, Zawahiri appears to be dead. And the U.S. appears to have carried out this strike truly against the odds, right? A year after a chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, following which even U.S. officials acknowledged the U.S. did not have the same counterterror ability. To have accomplished that from afar, with all of those challenges, is a remarkable feat.
And we're certainly going to stay on top of this story. This is major, major breaking news. A huge, huge win for the U.S. intelligence community and the U.S. military, the CIA, of course, as well. Jim, we're going to stay on top of this story. Thanks very much. Sure. And to our viewers, thanks very much for watching. I'm Wolf Blitzer in the Situation Room. Aaron Burnett out front picks up our special coverage right now.